Welcome to today's session, Simplifying Participant Recruitment and Retention Through Digitization, and thank you all for joining. Before we begin, I would like to cover a few quick notes about our webinar platform. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on the CloudBiz event page for everyone to access. Our presenters will review some content, and then we will move to an audience Q&A. We encourage you to submit questions at any time through the Zoom webinar console Q&A section at the bottom of your console. We will answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. My name is Jennifer Turcott, and I am a pharma advisor and the industry strategist within the healthcare and life sciences team here at Salesforce. But before I begin, I want to remind everyone that purchases or investment decisions should be made based on products and services that are currently available. With that, let's get started. Joining me today is Rishabh Mittal, Associate Director, Clinical Services at CloudBiz, and Ian Marks, VP of Global Life Sciences at Salesforce. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Rishabh?
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. My name is Rishabh. I'm based out of Toronto, Canada. I have about 15 years of healthcare and clinical research experience. In my career, I have worked with various hospitals, CROs, and sponsors, and have managed various trials as study coordinator as well as a clinical trial manager. I'm looking forward to this exciting discussion today. Thank you all for joining.
Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Ian Marks, and I'm the Vice President, Global Head of Life Sciences at Salesforce. I've been at Salesforce for a little over 2 years, but I'm someone who spent my entire career working in the pharma R&D space. I was a bench scientist when I first began, spent many years working in clinical development and clinical operations, and then working in innovation. So really excited for this discussion today.
Great. Thanks, Rishabh and Ian. So let's jump into the topic again for today. And of course, as we all know, it is Clinical Trials Day, May 20th. And so we're really excited to share some fresh perspectives from you.
All right, so let's kick off. So I love to start off by just starting off by saying, you know, this era of clinical trials as we've known it is really coming to an end. And if you look at sort of on the one hand, you have the rising costs of running a trial, and you couple that with the commercial risks of failure, and what you have is really not sustainable. And this disruptive state that we're in currently, whether it's provoked by the difficulty to recruit and retain patients or the global pandemic, has really been driving this adoption of new technologies and catalyzing the digital transformation of clinical trials. And companies are looking to leverage digital technologies to improve everything from the recruitment and retention of patients to enhancing data collection and analytics, while at the same time, they want to reduce the overall cost and time required to run a trial. Unfortunately, what we have seen are limitations on how these technologies are being implemented. And this is translated into disconnected point solutions, really a lack of a cohesive data and insight strategy, and solutions that are just difficult to use, difficult from a patient perspective, difficult from a site and a sponsor perspective as well. We can go to the next slide. So a customer once described to me the clinical trial landscape as a competition of shiny things. And that's exactly what we've been observing. There's this huge appetite from pharma for technology to enable clinical trials to become faster, cheaper, more accessible, while of course they also want to reduce the time that it takes for the trial to run. And this has created a huge surge of emerging companies that are looking to improve everything from study designs to the recruitment of patients to streamlining study startup. And really this list goes on and on. And so what we're seeing are lots of companies delivering point solutions to address some of these major challenges in clinical trials. And all these solutions are flooding an estimated $50 billion clinical trial market. And as you can expect, this has caused a lot of confusion of the how, when, where, and really which solution to achieve this integrated, seamless approach that puts the patient at the center while at the same time making it easier for the site and the sponsor. We can go to the next slide. And clinical trials represents one of the largest portions of expenses for a pharmaceutical company. The estimated time and cost of bringing just one drug to the market ranges from an estimated 1 billion to 2.6 billion and 10 to 12 years. And this rise in R&D costs has far outpaced the rise of FDA drug approvals over the past 2 decades. And if you look at the probability, this is the overall probability of clinical success, the likelihood that a drug entering clinical testing will eventually be approved is less than 12%. And at the same time, we're seeing a 10 to 12% increase in the number of clinical trials that are being run each year globally. So let's see, we have globally pharmaceutical companies are spending more than $160 billion in R&D, half of which can be attributed to long drug development timelines driven by inefficiencies in clinical trial design and implementation. But don't worry, there is light at the end of the tunnel, because if you think of things like how technology is actually impacting clinical trials, and technological innovations really offer this potential to improve efficiency and productivity through the use of novel outcomes, through increased patient engagement, and really reducing the patient burden, as well as improving the overall trial management of a trial. Next slide.
Okay, thanks, Ian. This brings us to decentralized clinical trials, as Ian discussed, and that's where technology helps. So we'll discuss how the processes are different in a decentralized clinical trial when compared to conventional trials. Now, if you see, the decentralized trials are the trials that are executed through combination of telemedicine, digital tools, and local healthcare providers, using processes and technologies that are different from the traditional clinical trials. We all know the decentralized clinical trials have been existing for quite some time, but the COVID-19 pandemic has catalyzed the adoption of these trials in recent times. These are basically the virtual trials or remote trials. When we say virtual, it seems like you are centralizing rather than decentralizing. So what are you decentralizing? You are decentralizing the site. If we now we can see on this slide, on the left side, in a conventional trial, patient goes to a hospital or a clinical research site, and the investigators and the coordinators perform the study-specific assessments and procedures. On the right side, in DCTs, you are taking the trial to patient's home through various means. It could be through telehealth. It could be actually the staff going to patient's home. And for this specific reason, some people also like to call DCTs as siteless trials. A very important point to note here is that a trial does not necessarily need to be a decentralized or a conventional or a traditional trial. You can also have hybrid trials. And that is how most of the trials are being conducted these days. The important question here is, why do people in the research industry think that the decentralized trials have the potential to shape the future of clinical trial industry? Let us take an example. Let us take an example of COVID-19. What happened during the peak of the COVID? There were restrictions on patients going to the hospitals, and that was more true if patients were going only for clinical research. Now, in decentralized trials, you are eliminating that need, and in turn saving the time for patients and for researchers, and consequently saving the costs. If we drill down a little bit more with an example, so you have to do an informed consent procedure in an actual visit to the site. But what happens with DCTs? You have e-consent through various digital solutions and platforms, and that can be performed from the comfort of patient's home, and in turn saves lots of time and money. Now, in addition to time and money, this has one great additional benefit, and that is of engagement. Here, patient has all the information in front of him, and that he can refer to any time throughout the trial's life cycle. So basically, DCTs are saving time, saving costs, and increasing patient engagement. So it is helping the sponsors, CRO sites, as well as the participants in the clinical trials. Next slide. Okay, so in this slide, let's look at some of the metrics on what we just talked about. So we took the example of COVID-19. There were surveys that were conducted with sites and CROs, and 48 to 95% of respondents stated that they used elements of decentralization in at least one of their trials during this period. So when we say elements of decentralization, we are basically talking about the hybrid trials. So there were some elements that were digital, some were conventional site-specific trial elements that were conducted. The other important stat here is that 64% of the respondents mentioned the adoption of patient-facing technologies as the most common step being taken by clinical trial sponsors. Now, that is a significant step and is truly decentralizing clinical trials where patients are engaging and participating in clinical trials remotely with the help of technology from a distant location as well. Next slide. Okay, let's look at some of the numbers that are throwing more light on the benefits of DCTs. The time required to recruit the patients can be reduced by 30 to 50%, and this number is basically going to increase as there is more and more adoption of the digital space in clinical trials. There is 90% increase in retention and 97% increase in engagement of the patients while using a decentralized versus a conventional trial. Those are huge numbers already. There is 30 to 60% increase in diversity and inclusion of populations from different demographic. This results in better quality of data, and hence there is 79% increase in data quality through various checks and validations that are built in DCT solutions. Okay, next slide.
All right, with that, yes, with that, we're going to move to a polling question. So please just use your phone camera to scan the QR code to respond to the poll. What is your biggest pain point around patient recruitment and retention? So some of the options here: lack of patient awareness, B, lack of patient engagement, C, inconvenient locations, and D, too many sites. I think we're just going to give it a couple of seconds for people to put their poll numbers in. I think we can come back to the poll. Oh, there we go. So primarily patient awareness, and then convenient locations, inconvenient locations, too many sites. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for participating. So Ian, back to you.
Okay, put the slides back up. All right. So first of all, thank you everyone for participating in that survey. Now I want to spend some time telling you what we've been hearing from our customers. Let's start with clinical trial design. And not surprisingly, the industry is moving towards a much more patient-centric approach to how they're thinking about clinical trial research and design. And really, it's around reducing the patient burden. It's just a big part of this, with the hopes of really boosting patient recruitment and retention rates. In addition, sponsors are looking to be able to better predict based upon the clinical trial design, better predict risk, better to predict potential dropout rates, reducing amendments and protocol inconsistencies, as well as being able to better determine the appropriate sample size and predict recruitment timelines. From a cohort composition and site selection, really matching the right trial with the right patient is a time-consuming, it's a challenging process, and it's challenging for both the clinical study team and for the patient. And pharma companies are looking to see how they can mine and extract data from various sources, including EHRs and lab data, to compare the eligibility criteria of a protocol and recommend matching studies. They're also interested in leveraging data to determine the most optimal clinical sites, the most optimal countries, really to avoid having failing study centers. And last, they want to be able to enable really a dynamic trial forecasting capability. So from a patient recruitment and retention, I think most of you know patient recruitment is one of the biggest risks to completing a study and hitting timelines. And in fact, nearly half of sites miss enrollment targets. And pharma companies are looking to see how they can accelerate trial recommendations by identifying eligible patients. They're looking to see how they can provide a personalized, patient-centric approach to engagement, as well as being able to better predict recruitment and retention issues. And the last is around virtual trials. And you heard this from Rishabh around the importance of how decentralized trials is now enabling this personalization. And really, decentralized trials offers this much more patient-centric approach to clinical trials, really with the overall goal of making clinical trials, easier for patients. And they do this by reducing or even eliminating the need for patients to travel to specific sites. And pharma companies are looking to leverage a whole bunch of technologies to support this, by supporting at-home study participation and tracking, to enabling telehealth visits, to supporting remote continuous monitoring, including using digital endpoints like ePros, as well as enabling connected devices and supporting medication adherence. We can go to the next slide.
Okay, thanks, Ian. As we discussed with the DCTs, the digital solutions are defining the clinical research industry today. And one such solution is patient recruitment digital solution. So a patient recruitment digital solution has two primary sites, patient activities and the site or investigator activities. Now this infographic here explains what all activities can be performed by patient through the patient portal and by sites through an investigator portal. The patient recruitment solutions are able to digitalize the entire recruitment process along with additional smart features such as metrics, dashboards, reports, analytics that are not available with conventional and manual recruitment processes. Some of the most important things that can be done with the digital patient recruitment solutions are, so we can see recruitment campaigns, outbound and inbound calls directly from within the system, pre-screening for eligibility, appointment scheduling, document management such as IRB approvals and advertisements that are used in recruitment campaigns, electronic consent, and last but not the least, we can say the communication between sites and patients. And the communication happens throughout the journey of a clinical trial through these solutions. So there is a stat that 32% of the entire clinical trial budget is spent on recruitment activities only. Now, this is a huge amount of money and it goes in billions of dollars. The digital solutions can help reduce this amount significantly, and that money can be used for developing more therapies at a faster pace. Next slide, please.
Okay, thanks, Rishabh. So understand the patient journey or understand clinical trials from a patient perspective really provides these invaluable insights to the sponsor and really enables a much more patient-centric approach when designing and executing a clinical trial. And truthfully, if we fail to build a clinical trial around the patient needs, the consequences of not doing so could be quite severe. You could face patients that are withdrawing from the studies because the clinical study is not really incompatible with their life and schedule, as well as you can have patients that are just feeling undervalued and under-supported throughout really a difficult time or a challenging time of their life. So not only does patient dropouts carry heavy financial implications, but the cost to an organization's reputation can be quite steep as well. But by engaging patients and their families from the beginning of a clinical study design and looking how new technologies can be used to reduce travel and upfront costs, trials can be created that not only attract and retain more patients, but also operate with greater efficiency. And some of the key insights that we receive from patients, if you look at that first, is around trial design. 93% of patients would be interested in helping design better trials. And really what we've seen is patients' involvement leads to empowerment and really enhances the overall quality of a clinical study. From an awareness perspective, patients want to be made aware of clinical studies. And in fact, 85% of patients were either unaware that the participation in a clinical trial was even an option at the time of diagnosis. And 75% of those patients said they would be willing to enroll had they known it was even possible. From a consent perspective, 81% of patients want to know about potential risks and benefits before participation. And the use of e-consent can really help to improve patient understanding of study objectives, design. It'll increase the regulatory compliance as well as reduce quality risks. From study visits, 52% of patients want study statistics, visit calendar, appointment reminders. Again, informing that patient, the more they understand about what is required of the study, the better the patient's going to feel. Trial participation. 71% of patients want to know about what are the activities to expect during the next visit, because an informed patient is a happy patient. Trial completion. 83% of patients want access to their own trial data, and 91% wanted updates about the outcomes of the overall study. And last is around re-engagement. 81% of patients want to hear about upcoming studies. I think the key takeaway that you can take from all this is that engaging patients before, during, and beyond will attract and retain more participants and really enable the study to be operated with a greater efficiency. Next slide.
Thank you, Ian. As discussed by Ian, the patient journey, and let's discuss some of the reasons for non-retention during this journey and how digitization can help. While we say patient recruitment is key to starting a clinical trial, patient retention is more critical in ensuring that the trial moves through the phases in a timely manner. Retaining participants in a trial ultimately helps keep a study on track, saving the sites time, costs, money, and resources in the process. The primary reasons for non-retentions of the patient are three that we can pin on. So first is inconvenient site location, second, lack of patient engagement, and third is incomplete information or lack of patient awareness, as we polled in our poll on the slides. Now, there are various strategies and tactics designed to keep patients enrolled in clinical trials, and from the patients, as we say, dropping out from the trial. The most important and simple strategy is keeping the patient motivated. And that is where the digitization of the clinical trial processes is playing a vital role. Now, the digitization can be achieved through various digital solutions and strategies that we have been discussing. Now, let us talk about a few solutions mentioned in the right column, and as well as mentioned by Ian in the previous slide. So take an example. If a patient is located 100 miles from a research site, they might come for 1 to 2 visits, but majority will ultimately drop. And this is where the solutions like DCTs are helping. Patients do not need to visit the hospitals. The entire informed consent process can be completed through e-consent. Now, if a patient needs to visit a clinic to answer some study-specific questionnaires or report an adverse event, they can do that with solutions like ePros, eCOAs, and eDiaries. You need to record vital signs like pulse, blood pressure, heart rate, send the devices to patients' homes and integrate to EDCs, or you can also use some of the existing wearables that are available in the market today. A patient needs dosing. You can send the medicines and other trial supplies and monitor that through RTSM solutions. You need to make sure the dosing has been properly administered to the patient. You need to do a video. You can do that through telehealth or telemedicine, as it is called in technology. For engaging with the patient, which is the second important reason for non-retention, you have tools like dedicated patient portals where you can engage and talk to the patient. You can send reminders, notifications. You also have study calendar and also the system to send participants payments or stipends directly through the system. Additionally, patient can access all the study related information at one location, whether it is detailed information on the study itself, or whether there are any study updates post a protocol amendment, or whether there are any new side effects that are emerging throughout the trial anywhere in the world, all available at a click of a button through mobile or desktop devices. Now, how are these solutions adding value to clinical trial processes? Specifically, the recruitment and retention processes will be discussed in the next slide. Next slide, please.
So as you've heard today, decentralized trials and really the corresponding digital solutions offers many benefits to the patient, to the sponsor, and the investigator sites. And although the pandemic accelerated really the adoption of these technologies, they're really here to stay. And decentralized trials offers sponsors and investigators numerous advantages, including improved patient acquisition, improved patient engagement, reduced dropout rates, reduced time to recruit patients. But most importantly, decentralized trials helps to reduce the burden to patients and moving towards a much more patient-centric approach. And with that, this will conclude our presentation today. I'm now going to pass it back to Jennifer.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Ian and Risha. So we have a few questions that have come in. So Ian, I know that you spend a lot of time running clinical trials yourself. Can you talk a little bit about, will the clinical study sites embrace decentralized trials?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think you've heard today, decentralized trials, they're very good for the patient, but decentralized trials are also investigator-centric. 94% of investigators stated that they would be interested in a decentralized study approach. However, there are many reasons why a site may embrace or reject a decentralized trial, including things as simple as IT infrastructure, their approval process, there's new training requirements for a site. I think in the end, the level of interest from the leaders and the staff are quite important. But sponsors and CROs need to be transparent in their conversations that they're having with their sites, really providing a balance between a site interest as well as the complexity and all the things that need to go along with bringing new technologies into a center. Because there will be additional training support that will be required, but in the end, it will lead to a more enhanced way that you can engage with the patient as well as make it simpler for the sites.
Great. We have another question. What about those patients that aren't tech friendly? How can those patients be managed?
Okay,
Risha,
I
do you
can
want
take
to
that.
talk about that?
Yeah, I can take that. So what happens is decentralization actually does not mean that we have to go technology route. Decentralization basically means that you have to take the trial to patient's home. So let's take an example. A patient is not good with technology. So you can still send a nurse to their home to do a drug or collect a sample. So that's also decentralization. They do not need to visit a site. You need to do a randomization. You can do through a phone. You do not need to have the patients log in through a web portal or anything like that. So decentralization is basically is a technique where you can use technology. Obviously, when you have technology, you have more metrics and it's more easier to define. But with some of those patients who are not tech friendly, you can still use that decentralization approach. I hope that answers.
Yeah, fully agree.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a mix of both. So Ian, just following on that, another question came in about, how can the benefits of decentralized approaches be promoted to attract and retain patients?
Yeah, great question. Because, if you think about it, many of the benefits of a decentralized trial are really designed to have a direct and positive impact on a patient. I mean, decentralized trials offers patient-centric approaches to clinical trials by really addressing a lot of the pain points that they had in traditional trial designs. Things like telehealth visits, use of electronic diaries, wearable devices, at-home delivery of investigator products. All these things are there to transform the patient experience and really make it a much more seamless part of their daily routine. So in the end, the decentralized trial approach lowers the burden of participation for a patient. And these benefits are likely to positively affect both enrollment and also the retention of patients in the study.
Great. Don't forget, please add your questions to the Q&A portion and we can answer them. Another question has come in, Risha, for you. What are some of the digital approaches and ways to overcome safety concerns that patients might have?
Okay, that's a very good question. So first of all, the process starts at informed consent. So first of all, listing all the expected risks in an informed consent is of utmost importance, I would say. And when the consent procedure is conducted through e-consent, for example, this should be stressed and then readily available for reference. So that's one approach. Now, second approach of safety is the reporting part. So you have, for example, an expected and a non-serious adverse event. Now, that adverse event you can report in an e-diary. So that's a digital approach. You have an e-diary and the investigators and the site staff can monitor those e-diary with the notifications as well as the reminders. If you have a little bit of a serious one, a serious adverse event, or we can say moderate adverse event, you can contact the investigator through telehealth or telemedicine while reporting it in an e-diary. So you have a record of it while you take a advice from an investigator. Obviously, as we know, with all the safety concerns, adverse event, if you have an emergency or a life-threatening serious adverse event or a safety event, you can directly go to ER. But we have the tools where you can report it to investigator, and it's actually easier to contact investigator through the digital technology than going to a hospital and then reaching out for a physician or an investigator.
Great. And then thinking back on the recruitment side of things, are either of you seeing social media as a good channel for recruitment? And how is this a complement to traditional approaches?
Yeah, Rishabh, you're the expert on this, so I'm going to pass it to you.
Sure, yeah, I can take it. Yes. So I have actually done a lot of social media campaigns in my past job. So social media is a great channel. A lot of recruitment campaigns can be run through Instagram and Facebook today, obviously with IRB approvals. It increases a lot of awareness, especially among the younger populations. Second advantage is, we can say, for the social media is its reach. So how it is complementing traditional approaches is that social media can cover a much bigger demographic area as compared to, say, a local radio channel or a local news channel, or if you're distributing brochures or pamphlets. Some of the traditional methods have been you putting advertisements on buses or the trains. Now, that has a very limited reach. With social media, you can basically reach anywhere in the world. If you have global trials, with one advertisement, you can run your campaigns throughout the world. So social media is definitely changing the recruitment campaigns and the recruitment rates for most of the trials.
Okay, super. Yeah, I think it's been an amazing change that the industry has started to adopt and is a great approach for the recruitment piece. And then, I think there's one last question that's come in, to both of you. What are some of the best approaches that you've seen to keep patients engaged in trials?
Yeah, I can start it. And I think that, Rishad, you can definitely jump in. I mean, it's all the things we talked about. It's how you can support a patient and really provide them with the information that they need, so the anxiety of entering a trial is taken away. So they don't like to have a lot of unknowns. So if you can inform them properly. So a lot of times, like, the consenting process is done under a lot of pressure. It's done in a site. They don't really have the time to read it over. By leveraging something like an e-consent, you're also giving the patient a lot more time to really read through it and really think about it. And then when they have a telehealth visit or they're going in to talk to the investigator, they'll have a lot more time to actually address a lot of their concerns. And then by really engaging with the patient digitally, you're allowing them to, again, address any concerns they have throughout the trial. You can provide them reminders of when they need to take their medicines. You're just really making it much more simple for the patient. So it's really the trial fits into their life versus the patient trying to fit a trial into their life. And I think that's the really big difference, is that by making it patient-centric, you're really trying to give them all the tools and engagement so that the overall experience is improved for that patient.
Okay, I think that was perfect, Ian. And I would say that some of the tools that are available are, for example, you have the chat features in some of the digital tools where you can chat with. You even have reminders, notifications for your upcoming visits, virtual visits or in-person visits. So those are the tools available. And other things could be, you can even give them payments and stipends directly through. Obviously, again, everything needs to be IRB and within the regulatory framework. So those kind of things, and study updates, all other communication methods, newsletters, brochures, everything can be delivered through digital platforms. So those are the tools available digitally.
Great. Super. Well, I think that's it for questions. So again, thanks to Rishabh and Ian for leading this topic today. I'm actually going to have their contact information popped up on the screen so that if anybody wants to reach out directly to Ian or Rishav, they can. And as a reminder, today's webinar will be available on the events portion of the CloudBiz website. We thank you again for joining us, and have a fantastic Friday and a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, everyone.